Trump thought he could embarrass her on live television, but Jasmine Crockett's calm reply flipped the moment and exposed more than anyone in that room was ready to face it. Happened on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day where Washington's heat makes even the marble floors feel alive. The White House briefing room was packed, reporters shoulder to shoulder, the clicking of cameras, mixing with muffled whispers on the front row, sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, invited to discuss the administration's education reform proposal. But this wasn't going to be an ordinary policy exchange. Everyone in that room felt it, that spark before something historic happens. The president walked in late, flanked by advisors. He carried that confident half smile he wore. Whenever he knew the spotlight was his good afternoon, he began, his voice sharp but measured. We're here to talk about improving education and making America smarter, stronger, and more competitive. Jasmine's eyes stayed on him. She had read every page of that proposal, every line that hinted at cuts to low-income schools. Her team had warned her to play it safe to avoid confrontation. But Jasmine had never been one to sit quietly when something didn't make sense. As the questions started, most reporters stuck to neutral ground: funding, allocations, state partnerships, test scores. Then Jasmine leaned forward, microphone close, and asked Mr. President if we're cutting funds to schools that already struggle to meet testing standards. How exactly does that make the country smarter? For a second, you could hear the air conditioning hum. Trump blinked, taken slightly off guard, but recovered quickly. Well, he said, his hand gesturing casually. Some of these schools don't use money properly. We're making sure funds go to the right places. Jasmine didn't look convinced, so punishing schools for being poor is now a fiscal responsibility. The tone changed instantly. The room tightened. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters glanced at each other, sensing the temperature rise. Trump stepped closer to the podium, his chin lifting. You know what, Jasmine? I think you should take an IQ test. Let's see who's really qualified here. A murmur ran through the room like a current. Some gasped, others held their breath. Jasmine didn't move. She adjusted her glasses slowly, then smiled. Not a nervous smile, but the kind that said, I was waiting for this, Mr. President. She said, her voice calm and even, would you like me to take it before or after you explain how cutting funding improves education outcomes? Silence, long, heavy, absolute silence. 9 seconds, that felt like 9 minutes. Reporters watched as Trump blinked, searching for a line, an answer, a way out. One of his aides shifted uncomfortably behind him. Someone coughed. Then a camera shutter snapped. That sound became the moment's exclamation point. Trump tried to laugh it off. Cute, he muttered, real cute. But as his words landed flat, the control he usually commanded in these rooms was slipping. Jasmine's question had done something rare. It exposed the gap between rhetoric and reason. In that instant, the crowd was no longer focused on him. They were looking at her, a young congresswoman from Texas who refused to shrink, who had just challenged the most powerful man in the world and made him stumble after the briefing ended. Jasmine walked out through the narrow hallway, lined with Secret Service agents. The noise behind her, voices, flashes, hurried footsteps grew distant. Her aide caught up, whispering, "You realize what you just did?" Jasmine didn't slow down. "Yes," she said, glancing toward the press doors. "I told the truth." Outside, the evening light reflected off the White House columns. Reporters were already typing, phones buzzing nonstop within minutes. The clip hit social media. Crockett question began trending before she reached her car. By the time she made it back to her office on Capitol Hill, late-night hosts were already booking segments about it. Some called her fearless. Others called her reckless. But everyone agreed something in that room had shifted. That 9-second silence became a mirror showing the country two very different kinds of intelligence. One that demands attention and one that earns it. And while the president's team scrambled to frame the moment as playful banter, those who watched live knew better. They saw composure outwit power. They saw a question that couldn't be dodged, a truth too clean to distort. But as Jasmine sat down in her quiet office, phone lighting up with messages, she knew this was just the beginning, because what happens after a moment like that, that's where the real story begins. By the time the sun went down over Washington, that night the clip had already reached millions. Cable networks looped it on repeat. Jasmine's calm expression, her deliberate question, the president's pause in those 9 seconds that nobody could ignore at a cafe near DuPont Circle. Two college students huddled over a laptop replaying the moment. That's the first time I've ever seen him speechless. One of them said, shaking his head. The other leaned back, smirking. She didn't even raise her voice. That's what made it hit harder across town, in an apartment overlooking the Potomac. Jasmine's team was gathered around a large television. The room smelled like cold coffee and nerves. Her communications director, Elena, stood near the window, phone in hand. CNN's calling it the Crockett counterpunch. MSNBC's saying she took him to school. Fox, well, they're saying she disrespected the office. Jasmine sat on the couch, still in her navy blue blazer shoes, off legs crossed. They were always going to say that. She replied quietly, I didn't go there to perform. I went there to get answers. Her phone vibrated again, a flood of notifications, texts, mentions, articles. Even her mother had sent a message. Baby, I saw you on TV. I'm proud, but be careful. She smiled softly at that one. Be careful, that had become a kind of prayer lately. But while the world saw a single clip, Jasmine remembered every heartbeat leading up to it. The tension, the unspoken warnings from colleagues telling her not to challenge the president directly. She knew the risk, yet she also knew that silence was worse in a nearby newsroom. Reporters were dissecting every frame. One analyst leaned over the playback monitor. Look at her body language. She doesn't move, not even a blink, when he says IQ test. That's control. That's power. Another added, you can almost hear the country exhale when she responds. It's like someone finally said what people were thinking. Meanwhile, the president's media team was in damage control mode. They issued a short statement to reporters. The president was joking. Congresswoman Crocker overreacted. The administration remains focused on education reform, but no one was buying it. The story had already taken a life of its own by morning major headlines, framed it as a political knockout. Late-night hosts joked about it. TikTok creators reenacted it, hashtags like number. 9-second silence and number IQ test challenge flooded every platform. Even teachers began sharing the clip in classrooms, using it as an example of composure under pressure. At Howard University, a student journalist posted, Crockett didn't just win an argument. She reminded us what intelligence looks like when it's used with grace. The post went viral. Jasmine's staff gathered again the next morning. The office buzzed with calls, news outlets, podcasts, organizations wanting interviews. Elena looked at Jasmine and said, you can't ignore this. You've become a symbol overnight. I'm not a symbol. Jasmine replied, setting down her coffee. I'm a congresswoman doing her job. Elena gave a small smile. Right, but right now, you're the congresswoman who made the president go silent for 9 seconds. And that means something. Jasmine took a long breath, glancing at the window outside. D.C. carried on like any other day. Cars honking, people walking, the city's heartbeat steady as ever. But inside her office, everything felt heavier, because moments like that didn't come without consequences. Her phone rang again this time. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Congresswoman Crocker, a voice said, this is Brian Fuller from Good Morning America. We'd love to have you on tomorrow to discuss your exchange with the president. Elena molted, say yes. Jasmine smiled faintly. I'll think about it, she said, before hanging up. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. You know what scares me the most, she said softly. What's that? Elena asked. That people will remember the moment, but not the message. Her team fell quiet, because she was right. The real issues in education reform was now buried beneath the spectacle. Later that day, Jasmine met with her legislative aide, Marcus, at a small diner in Arlington. The place was half empty, the kind of spot where politicians could talk without being overheard. Marcus flipped through his notes. We've received over 30,000 emails in less than 24 hours, most of them supportive. Teachers, parents, even students. They're calling you the voice of reason? Jasmine looked out the window. Reason doesn't trend as fast as outrage, she said, but it lasts longer. She sipped her coffee, then added, we're not going to let this moment fade into memes. I want to redirect this attention to real policy. Let's set up a town hall, maybe in Detroit or Atlanta somewhere. It matters. Marcus nodded. I'll make calls tonight before leaving the diner. Jasmine signed a napkin for the waitress, who whispered, my daughter saw you last night. She said you're her new hero. Jasmine smiled, but her eyes softened. Tell her to study hard. She said that's the real power. When she stepped outside, the evening air carried that charged energy. Again, the feeling that something bigger was taking shape. But fame and pressure always come as a pair, and Jasmine was about to find out how heavy both could get. The next 48 hours felt like standing in the eye of a political hurricane. Every news outlet wanted a piece of Jasmine Crockett. Her inbox overflowed with invitations, interviews, and commentary requests. Her staff barely slept, the office lights on, late into the night, as calls poured in from across the country. Elena sat at her desk scrolling through the morning headlines. Crockett outsmarts the commander-in-chief. She read aloud a masterclass in composure. Another, she glanced at Jasmine. They're calling it the 9-second revolution. Now Jasmine, still in her gray suit from the night before, leaned against the doorway, arms folded, revolution. I just asked a question. Elena raised a brow. Yeah, but you asked the right question. The one nobody else had the nerve to. Across the city, the White House wasn't handling things quite so gracefully. Senior staffers were fuming, and the West Wing communications director, Alan Devereaux, slammed a stack of papers on the table. We can't keep replaying that moment, he barked. It makes him look weak. Cut it from tomorrow's coverage. Another aide spoke up timidly. Sir, it's everywhere. Even kids on YouTube are remixing it. There's no cutting it. The president was in the adjoining room, pacing. She disrespected me on live television, he muttered. No one talks to me like that. No one. Deborah sighed. Sir, we can issue another statement. Maybe call it a lighthearted exchange? Trump stopped pacing. No, we hit back schedule. A rally somewhere big. I'll remind people who's in charge. Back in Jasmine's world that same afternoon felt surreal. Her office was busier than ever, but she refused to let the noise distract her. She sat quietly at her desk reading an email from a middle school teacher in Cleveland. You reminded my students that intelligence isn't about shouting the loudest. It said it's about asking the right questions. She smiled at that one. Those were the messages that mattered, but politics rarely leaves room for peace by the next morning. Talk shows were speculating about her motives. Was she positioning herself for higher office? Was it a calculated political move? Even some of her allies began offering advice that sounded more like warnings. Congressman Reed from Illinois called her directly Jasmine. Listen, you made your point, but tread carefully. Presidents have long memories. Then I'll make sure mine's longer, she replied before hanging up later that day. She was invited to appear on Good Morning America. The studio in Manhattan buzzed with producers and makeup artists. She could hear the faint hum of cameras. Preparing to go live during the pre-interview, the host Dana Reeves leaned forward and said, You know, Jasmine, people are calling you fearless, but some critics say you disrespected the office of the president. What do you say to that? Jasmine straightened her posture. Respect isn't silence, she said. I respect the office. I also respect the truth, and sometimes those two things collide. When the segment aired, her words hit hard. The clip racked up millions of views within hours. Commentators began framing her as a rising voice of reason, someone who stood for accountability. Not theatrics, but not everyone saw it that way. That same evening, conservative outlets ran with headlines like Crockett's arrogance on display. Anonymous sources began leaking snippets of her old speeches, twisting words to paint her as radical. Hashtags shifted overnight. Hashtag Crockett question was joined by hashtag Crockett chaos. Elena stormed into Jasmine's office, tablet in hand. They're turning it on. You Twitter's a mess right now. Jasmine looked up from her laptop. Let them. The truth doesn't vanish because someone dislikes it. Elena hesitated. I know, but they're framing you as a threat. Jasmine leaned forward. Then maybe that means I'm doing something right. That night, as she left the Capitol, she stopped at the Lincoln Memorial. The city was quiet, the reflection of the monument stretching across the water. She stood there for a long time, thinking about how easily history repeats itself. One voice challenging authority, the backlash that follows, and the quiet courage it takes to keep going. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother again. Proud of you, baby. But remember, power always protects itself. Keep your spirit clean. She pocketed the phone and looked at the statue. I will, she whispered the next morning. Brought new. Headlines polls showed her public approval. Skyrocketing, people admired her poise, her intelligence, her refusal to be baited. Comment sections filled with messages like, "We need more leaders like her." Meanwhile, in the West Wing, the president prepared for his rally. Aides rushed around as he practiced lines meant to restore his image. "They call me dumb," he told the teleprompter. "Well, I built a billion-dollar empire. That's my IQ test," Devereaux muttered under his breath. "Let's just hope this doesn't backfire." But it did. When the rally aired, the crowd cheered, but online reactions mocked his attempt to save face side-by-side videos, compared his speech to Jasmine's composed demeanor. The contrast was brutal by that weekend. Late-night hosts were calling it the 9 seconds that shook the White House. Jasmine didn't celebrate. She spent the weekend with her staff drafting a new education proposal, determined to redirect the conversation back to what mattered still. She couldn't ignore what was happening. Something had shifted in her life and in the nation's perception of leadership. But with attention comes scrutiny, and the higher you climb, the stronger the wind becomes by Monday morning. Washington felt different. The energy in the Capitol was sharper. Restless, like everyone was waiting for the next move in a chess game, only two players could see Jasmine. Crockett arrived at her office early, coffee in hand. Hair tied back, her phone already buzzing with alerts the moment she turned on the TV. Her face filled the screen again. A panel of analysts debated her now famous exchange. One called it a turning point for political discourse. Another scoffed, saying she ambushed the president for attention. Jasmine muted the sound. She'd heard enough opinions to last a lifetime. Elena entered the room with a stack of printed reports. "The president's team has doubled down," she said, placing the papers on Jasmine's desk. "They're calling you a grandstander and saying your question was disrespectful." Jasmine didn't even look up. "Let them," she said quietly. "If telling the truth makes me a grandstander, I'll wear it outside her window." The city was waking up, horns blaring, aides hurrying to meetings, the sun cutting between the buildings like gold through smoke. Inside, though, the atmosphere felt heavier. Every call now came with both opportunity and risk. "An assistant knock, ma'am. CNN wants to book you for a debate segment tomorrow." Jasmine hesitated. "Who's the other guest?" "Alan Devereaux." The assistant said. Elena frowned immediately. "The president's communications director." "They're trying to bait you. Don't do it." But Jasmine's mind was already working. "No," she said, "I'll do it. Let's set it up." That evening, as she sat at her kitchen table reviewing notes, her phone rang again. An unknown number. "This is Jasmine, Congresswoman Crocker." The voice replied. "This is Tom Fields from the New York Times, off the record. People inside the White House say the president's furious. He's demanding loyalty tests from staff, questioning who leaked briefing details. Your name's on every talking point this week." Jasmine sighed, rubbing her temple. "He's the president. He can say whatever he wants, but the truth doesn't go away because he's angry." Fields lowered his voice. "You've got momentum. Use it wisely. He's looking for a way to discredit you." After hanging up, Jasmine sat there in silence for a long time. The weight of everything finally caught up to her. The noise, the attention, the pressure to say the right thing. Every second of every day. The next night, the CNN debate aired live from a studio in Washington. The lights were blinding. The cameras close across from Jasmine sat Alan Devereaux, slick suit, clipped smile, the look of a man who'd rehearsed his lines. The moderator began. "Mr. Devereaux, Congresswoman Crockett's exchange with the president has sparked national conversation. What's your response?" Alan leaned forward. "Look, this administration values dialogue, but we also value respect." The Congresswoman was grandstanding for cameras. The president's IQ comment was a joke. She took it too seriously. Jasmine tilted her head slightly. "A joke." She said, her tone soft but steady. "So cutting funds from struggling schools is a joke too? Or is accountability what makes you uncomfortable?" Alan's smirk faltered. "No one's cutting," she interrupted gently. "I've read the bill, section 203, paragraph 2. You're pulling 30% from Title I programs. That's not leadership, that's neglect." The moderator raised an eyebrow. "Congresswoman, you're saying the administration is intentionally disadvantaging lower-income schools." "I'm saying," Jasmine replied, "that pretending bad policy is humor is how injustice hides in plain sight." The studio went still. Alan shuffled his papers, visibly tense. The moderator turned to the camera. "We'll be right back after this break," when they cut to commercial. The crew exchanged looks. Even the cameraman whispered, "She cooked him," after the broadcast. Jasmine's phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages poured in from colleagues, journalists, and even high school students. One text stood out. "My mom's a teacher in Georgia. She says, you made her proud tonight." Jasmine smiled faintly, then put her phone face down. She didn't need to see the rest. Meanwhile, back at the White House, Allen was cornered by the president himself. "You let her embarrass you on national TV?" Trump shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "You had one job, to make her look small," Allen stammered. "Sir, she came prepared." "I don't care," the president barked. "I want something that hits her harder. Find something, anything." Allen left the room pale and shaken. He knew what that meant that night. Jasmine sat alone in her apartment. She turned off the lights, opened the window, and let the city air drift in. The noise of Washington seemed far away now. For the first time in days, she felt still. She thought about what her mother used to say: "Strength isn't loud, baby. It's steady." And she realized that was what unnerved people the most, not her anger, but her calm. She turned back to her laptop and began typing notes for a new speech. Not about herself, but about every student whose school might lose funding because of politics, because this wasn't about a viral moment anymore. It was about what came next, but Washington never lets a moment rest. And Jasmine was about to learn that every victory invites a new kind of fight. The invitation from The View arrived 2 days later. It wasn't just another interview. It was an opportunity to speak directly to millions of viewers who rarely tuned into political broadcasts. Elena was thrilled this could be the moment you shift the narrative. She said, pacing in Jasmine's office, "If you keep your composure like before, they'll see the real you, not the version cable news is trying to frame." Jasmine listened quietly, then nodded. "I'll go," she said. "But we're not talking about the IQ moment for 20 minutes. I want the focus on education reform." Elena smiled knowingly. "That's exactly why they'll love you on the morning of the interview." Jasmine boarded a flight from Washington to New York. She chose a simple outfit, soft gray suit, no jewelry except a small gold pin shaped like a book. The plane hummed faintly as she reviewed her notes, though she barely needed them anymore. The message was carved into her mind: every child deserves the tools to think freely and learn deeply regardless of where they're born. As the car drove her from LaGuardia to the studio, the city flashed by in quick bursts: coffee carts, traffic light, strangers scrolling on phones. She thought of her mother back in Dallas, a former public school teacher who used to grade papers late into the night. "Every one of these kids has something bright inside them." Her mother would say, "You just have to fight to keep that light alive in the green room." The producers were friendly but focused. One of them, a young woman with a headset, said, "Congresswoman Crocker, the host might ask about your viral exchange, but you can redirect however you like. You're live in 5 minutes, got it?" Jasmine replied, her voice steady when the segment began. She stepped onto the stage to warm applause. The host greeted her with smiles, one of them saying, "Congresswoman, your exchange with the president stopped the country for 9 seconds. You've become a household name overnight. How has life changed?" Jasmine leaned forward slightly, hands clasped. "Honestly, I'm still processing it, but I don't want this conversation to be about me. The real story is about kids in underfunded schools who've been ignored for too long." The audience murmured in agreement. She continued, "When we talk about education, we're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about real lives: teachers buying supplies with their own money, students sitting in classrooms with broken heat." That's what I was trying to address when I asked that question. One of the hosts nodded thoughtfully. "It's rare to see someone keep their cool in that kind of moment. What was going through your mind?" Jasmine smiled faintly. "Honestly, grandmother's voice, she used to say, 'Baby, if someone throws fire, bring water, not more fire.' That's all I tried to do." Laughter and applause filled the studio within hours. Clips of the interview were everywhere. Hashtags like #BringWater, not fire began trending. Even critics found themselves softening. Editorials described her as measured yet fearless, a voice of sanity in an age of noise. But success always has shadows. Back at the White House, the president's advisors watched the interview with irritation. "She's rewriting the story," Allen said, pacing the communications office. "People see her as calm and reasonable now, not a threat." The president frowned. then make her one find something to drag her down. Meanwhile, Jasmine flew back to D.C. exhausted but grounded. She arrived home late, dropped her suitcase, and checked her messages among the flood of emails. One stood out, a message from a high school principal in Detroit. Our students watched your interview today. They said it made them believe their voices matter. That line hit her harder than any headline. She replied personally, they do. Always. The next morning, CSMS morning, Jasmine met with her staff in the conference room. Charts covered the walls showing public opinion shifts and new education initiatives. Marcus pointed to one graph. Your approval ratings among young voters just doubled. Jasmine exhaled slowly. Then let's use that energy, set up town halls, real conversations, no speeches, just listening. Elena grinned. Where do we start? Atlanta, Jasmine said without hesitation. My grandmother always said when people see themselves in you, they'll follow your fight. Let's give them something worth following. That night in a small hotel room preparing for the trip, Jasmine turned on the TV. A reporter was saying, Congresswoman Crockett's calm rebuttals have transformed her from a viral moment into a genuine leader. She watched quietly, then turned off the screen. Fame didn't matter, purpose did. Still, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what was ahead. Standing up once had made her visible. Standing up again would test her endurance. As she looked out the window at the city lights, she whispered to herself, stay steady, but steadiness isn't silence. And the louder her message grew, the more the storm on the other side began to gather. By the end of the week, Washington was buzzing like a live wire. Every network, every political podcast, every morning panel circled back to one name, Jasmine Crockett. Her approval ratings climbed higher than anyone had expected. Late-night hosts had stopped joking about her and started quoting her. Instead, even international outlets were replaying her interviews, framing her as the congresswoman who humbled the president inside the White House. That title didn't sit well. Trump was in the Oval Office surrounded by his senior aides, his mood somewhere between irritation and disbelief. How is she still everywhere? He barked, pointing at the television. The screen showed Jasmine speaking at a community event in Atlanta, surrounded by teachers and students. She asked one question, and now she's America's genius. Alan Devereaux cleared his throat cautiously. Sir? The public responded to her composure. She didn't insult you. She questioned policy. It made her look smart. Trump snapped. She's not smarter than me, Alan. Nobody is. Alan hesitated, then said she's turning the narrative into substance. People think she's reasonable. That's dangerous. Trump slammed his palm on the desk. Then let's make her look unreasonable. Within days, online forums friendly to the administration began pushing stories, rumors about her, personal life claims of impropriety, old photos twisted out of context. It was predictable, almost mechanical, but it still hurt to watch. Jasmine's staff noticed it immediately. Elena Marcus said one morning, holding his phone out, you need to see this. They're running hit pieces on her all over social media. Elena scrolled through the posts, doctored images, fake quotes, wild conspiracies. They're trying to smear her. She said, her voice tight. When Jasmine walked in, they both turned toward her. I've seen it, she said quietly. And no, we're not responding. Marcus frowned. If we don't, it sticks. Jasmine sat at the head of the table. If we do, we validate it. Let's stay focused. We talk policy, not gossip. Elena leaned forward. You realize they'll double down if you stay silent. Jasmine looked at her, then let them. The truth outlast noise. That day she traveled to a public school in Baltimore, a low-income district that had been struggling for years. The walls were covered in faded paint, the classrooms filled with hand-me-down books. But the kids, they were bright, curious, hungry to learn. A young boy raised his hand during a Q&A. Congresswoman, are you scared of the president? The room went quiet. Jasmine smiled softly. No, she said, I'm more scared of what happens when no one asks questions. That line spread like wildfire by nightfall. It was plastered across Twitter, quoted by journalists, and printed on protest signs in cities nationwide. Meanwhile, the president's frustration grew during a private dinner with donors in Florida. He complained they treat her like a hero because she embarrassed me. Once I've built skyscrapers, I ran a country. She's just talk, one donor replied carefully. Sir, maybe ignore her. Engaging only makes her bigger. Trump shook his head. You don't ignore enemies, you crush them back in D.C. Jasmine's team worked late. Analyzing the political terrain polling data showed a dramatic shift. Women voters were rallying around. Her teachers' unions were endorsing her message. Editorials framed her as a new moral voice in Washington. But behind the scenes, Jasmine felt the pressure late at night. She'd sit at her kitchen table reading emails from strangers. Most were kind, but a few weren't. Some were threatening, others were cruel. She never replied, but the words stayed with her. One evening, Elena found her staring at the window, deep in thought. "You okay?" she asked softly. Jasmine didn't turn around. "I keep thinking about that boy in Baltimore. She said he asked if I was scared. I said no, but I think I am not of him, of what fear does to people who stop asking questions." Elena walked over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then don't stop." Jasmine nodded slowly. "I won't." 2 days later, the president held another rally, this time in Ohio. The crowd roared, flags, waving chants echoing through the stadium. In the middle of his speech, he brought up Jasmine's name again. "She thinks she's smarter than everyone." He shouted, "She's a fake. She wants to take credit for things she didn't do." The crowd booed. Cameras caught the smirk on his face, the satisfaction of the moment. But hours later, clips from the rally went viral again, only this time not in his favor. Viewers compared his shouting to Jasmine's calm, and the contrast spoke louder than words. By midnight, the hashtag "Stay Steady," a phrase she'd quietly repeated to herself, was trending across the country. People posted it as a message of resilience, strength, and quiet resistance. For the first time, Jasmine realized something profound. The more he tried to discredit her, the more people recognized her sincerity. The tide had turned, and now it wasn't about winning arguments, it was about leadership. But victory comes with responsibility, and Jasmine was about to face her most defining moment. Yet 3 weeks after the briefing that shook Washington, Jasmine stood behind a podium at Howard University. The auditorium was full. Students, teachers, journalists, even parents' cameras lined the back of the room. But for once, the flashing lights didn't feel invasive. They felt earned. The chatter in the audience faded as she approached the microphone. She took a slow breath, scanning the room. She began. "When I first walked into the White House briefing room, I didn't plan to make headlines. I planned to ask a question. That's it, a simple question about how cutting funding helps students learn. But sometimes one question can echo louder than 1,000 speeches." Applause rippled through the room. Jasmine smiled, not because of the praise, but because she could finally steer the conversation towards something real. She told the crowd about the kids she met in Baltimore and the teachers in Detroit who spent their own money on supplies. She spoke of how policy isn't abstract, it's personal. "When we talk about test scores," she said, "we're really talking about futures. When we talk about budgets, we're deciding which dreams survive." A student in the front row raised his hand. "Congresswoman, how did you stay calm when the president challenged you?" "I think most of us would have lost it." Jasmine chuckled lightly. "I wanted to believe me, I did, but anger burns fast. Composure lasts longer. My grandmother always said, don't trade truth for temper. So I chose to stay calm, not for me, but for everyone watching who needed to see that intelligence doesn't have to shout." The audience nodded, taking in every word. She continued, "Leadership isn't about who talks the loudest or who wins the argument. It's about who keeps asking the hard questions, even when the room gets uncomfortable." Especially then, as the applause built again, Jasmine's expression softened. "I'll tell you something else," she said. "Those 9 seconds of silence, they weren't about me winning or him losing. They were about accountability, because silence," she paused, "reveals truth faster than shouting ever could." After the event, she stayed to shake hands, answer questions, and listen. A young woman approached, clutching a notebook. "I want to run for office one day," she said shyly, "but sometimes I worry. No one will take me seriously." Jasmine smiled warmly. "Then make them, not by yelling, by knowing your facts so well they can't dismiss you. Speak with calm, act with courage, and don't mistake quiet for weakness." Outside, the evening light stretched across the campus lawns. Reporters gathered, but Jasmine took her time leaving. She walked with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Not triumph, because the real victory wasn't the viral moment or the headlines. It was seeing others inspired to stand taller, question deeper, think wider across the city. News networks recapped her speech. One anchor summed it up perfectly. What began as a confrontation has become a conversation, one that's reshaping how Americans see leadership even inside the White House. Staffers couldn't ignore the shift. Alan Devereaux, exhausted and bitter, admitted to a colleague, "She changed the game. He can yell all he wants. She already won the room that night." Jasmine sat alone in her office, papers scattered across her desk. The phone buzzed with another flood of messages, congratulations, invitations, interview requests. But she ignored them for a moment, staring instead at a handwritten note pinned to her corkboard. It was from her mother. "Never forget, calm minds. Build strong bridges." She smiled, faintly exhaled, and turned off her phone. The noise of politics could wait. What mattered was the next bill, the next classroom, the next young person who believed their voice mattered, because she proved that it did. As she gathered her things to leave, Marcus peeked in. "You heading out?" "Yeah," she said, "early flight to Dallas tomorrow. I promised my mom I'd visit her class." Marcus grinned. "You never stop, do you?" Jasmine laughed. "Not when the work's this important." She walked out into the night, the Capitol lights glowing behind her. Steady, constant, unshaken, the kind of light that doesn't blind, but guides her. Story had started with a single question, asked in courage and composure. But what it became was far greater, a reminder that intelligence, grace, and patience can still break through the noise of power. And as the world kept replaying those 9 seconds, Jasmine moved on to her next fight, knowing that sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that changes it forever. The real measure of strength isn't volume, it's vision and the courage to stand calm in the storm. If you believe in that kind of leadership, share the story, subscribe, and keep asking questions, because one question can still change everything.